Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. I'm giving you a thumbs up. It's a little bit early, but I thought I'd better check in to make sure that it actually works. And I'm just going to text my husband to make sure that it is actually working. So if you give me a second. Great, thanks Raj. It's, as I say, I think we've got 2 minutes to go. So I thought I'd use the first, I don't know which screen to look at. I think I'll use this build-up period just to remind everybody about the fantastic exercise classes, which are on Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. every morning. And if you have a look on the site, you will see an explanation of which classes might be better suited to you depending on your level of ability, and or you can have a go at all of them or even just sit and watch, but it's a fantastic opportunity to get moving and to feel more alive. And also, if you need to get any further information about the COVID situation, latest updates, again, you can go on the website for that. So I think I shall just double check. We are nearly at 2 o'clock. So I'm just going to start off by saying thank you for joining me and well done, because it's not always easy, especially on a beautiful afternoon like this, to stick yourself in front of a monitor and listen to somebody random who you never met ranting on about her life. So I appreciate you joining in this afternoon, and it's good to connect, especially at the moment in times like these. I'm going to start the podcast because it's 2 o'clock, and I'm going to start off by saying my name, which is Satinder, and my age. I'm 54 years old. Mine is not a sad story. There are very difficult storylines within it, but I hope that you're challenged to think differently about stroke or any condition that has a significant impact on your life and which labels you and which makes you feel like you are somehow different from normal society. I hope that my experience will show you that you can do more with your brain than you thought you could, and that you can do more with your body than you thought you could. For me, and I think that's the general consensus when you read scientific evidence now, there's a lot of knowledge out there and personal experience that suggests that if you have a purpose and a meaning in your life, if you have a reason to push yourself beyond where you would normally push yourself, you're more likely to achieve something, because you're so distracted by just trying to achieve your goal that you don't sort of focus so much on my brain hurts, my body hurts, and also because you're enjoying the process more and you feel that there's a reason and a purpose to go for it. Now, I've played the lead role in quite a few storylines in my life over the last 34 years. And these include having a stroke at the age of 20 back in 1986. It was a very different landscape back then. And living with disability for more years than I haven't lived with disability. I have, within that time, had, unfortunately, to visit hospitals every year in the last 34 years, including that have been 10 operations. And I have had only 2 of them actually in the last 5 months. I've also had further unrelated physical health problems, as well as mental health problems. I live with daily physical pain, and when I get up, I move like my 91-year-old dad. But once I get moving, then I'm not quite as bad as my 91-year-old dad, although he is super fit. I've also experienced living in a very difficult first marriage, which was coercive, and going through a very traumatic divorce, which, to be truthful, was probably the most difficult, long period of my life. And I have also experienced the joy of entering a loving marriage. And through that loving marriage, understanding that all the things I felt ashamed of and that I took for granted about myself, I should actually big up and feel proud of. Now, I wouldn't say that I'm good at that yet, but I'm working on it. And it's taken me a good 3 decades to get it into my thick skull that actually, rather than feeling, oh, I need to do more, I wish I was more able to do X, Y, Z, I'm starting to accept that, we should look more at how far we've come rather than always being cross at ourselves about what we can't do. And my husband, Mike, has helped me to show that, whether it's from, by the way, Satinder, you actually qualified as a doctor, that's a big deal, to the very first time we went out on a date, thinking it was dead cool that I managed to cut up an asparagus with my fork because I couldn't use my knife because this arm doesn't really do very much. So I've also given birth after stroke and raised 2 boys who are now fully grown, very fully grown. And I have also at some point in my life raised them as a single parent and always with disability. I've had a life that has been brimming with adventures. And that's what I really want to focus on is, yes, there's been some difficult experiences in my life, but I've had many adventures. And these have spanned the whole time that I had stroke. I'm a keen sailor. I've sailed all over the world, and we've had some very challenging sails and experiences, some of them quite scary, some of them actually from the northeast coast of England, sailing in very high winds and storms. But, not easy when you've got disability and your balance is pretty rubbish, but very exhilarating in a weird way. You'll come to learn that I'm a bit weird like that. I've also done a lot of solo trekking in my life, carrying my own kit and supplies over 3 days, doing my own orienteering, getting from A to B. That was very highly challenging. I won't tell you the state of my right foot at the end of all that. It was a mess, but it was a great experience. And it also made me realize that every time you do something that you didn't think you can do, it surprises you, but it also makes you raise your bar and you start to think, well, if I can do that, maybe I could also do the other thing. So it makes you keep stepping up rather than stepping down in your life. I have a companion flying certificate, which allows me to take control of the plane, and if there's an emergency, hopefully to land it, though I'm not quite sure about that. And I also, with my husband Mike, we run a smallholding. We have sheep that currently lambing. In fact, Mike just helped to pull one out about an hour ago, and we have pigs, and we have hens, and we have dog. So I'm very keen on nature and being outside. It's been my kind of savior, really. It's been the thing that's really helped me physically and mentally. And I would suggest it to all of you because nature, it's really hard to be miserable when you're out in nature, especially on a day like this. And we have a large garden, which I landscaped myself, and I executed a lot of the works myself. And this means I've spent most of my free time in welly boots, being very muddy, very filthy, and very, very happy. And it's probably been why it's accelerated all my arthritis, because obviously I've executed a lot of physical activity in my life using mostly one side of my body. So I have a left side which looks more like Popeye, and a right side which looks more like olive oil, for those of you who remember Popeye. And it's also accelerated things like arthritis. I mean, I've just had some shoulder surgery which failed, so my arm's actually worse than it's been in the last 30 odd years. But, you know, I'm determined that I'm going to keep working at it. And if not, I will have to walk the dog more instead and give up my swimming. But I'm not giving up on that yet. I've also had a highly rewarding career in the NHS, which has spanned 25 years and which has involved working as a GP partner at a practice in a rural practice, and has also involved me being a clinical commissioning chair and taking on another number of other lead roles as well in the NHS. And I've also experienced the rewards of setting up, creating a local charity for adults with physical disabilities, where I provide gardening therapy from our home. We modified an area of the garden to make it easier access for people. And I also provide other wellbeing activities for them as well, like Tai Chi, yoga, mindfulness, and so forth. And of course, the work I do as a trustee with different strokes, which is the reason that I managed to get on and speak to you with you today. So I've experienced disability from a number of angles, from the personal angle, as a young disabled working mum, living with several long-term conditions, the professional angle, as a GP working for 25 years in the NHS, but also working in different NHS sectors as well, mental health, clinical governance, and of course clinical commissioning. And from the volunteer angle, as founder of the local charity I mentioned, and also as the trustee of different strokes. And they've all pulled together and given me a kind of a more sort of rounded understanding of what it's really like for people who live with long-term conditions, whose lives are turned upside down for whatever the reason. And my 34 years of experience and observations have led me to conclude, and this is a very basic conclusion because I could go on for hours about what I would conclude, but in summary, mainstream medicine can't always help us. In fact, it doesn't always help us. It doesn't always know what's wrong with us, and it would be the first to accept that. But I would say that it's very difficult to really understand somebody until you know how they currently live and also what really matters to them going forward. Because sometimes what doctors tell us isn't what really matters to us. But what matters to us is the only thing that's basically going to get us out of bed every morning. If you think about it, infections and plagues used to be the main cause of disease in society. And yes, we have COVID-19 at the moment, but by and large, more diseases now are caused by the damage from slowly accumulated damage that we do to ourselves over a number of years. And Western medicine is starting to recognize this. And it's also realizing that a lot of these diseases can be made worse or even caused by our lifestyle and the environment around us, and that stress is a major culprit in this. In the following weeks, I will provide a simple route to understanding why sleep, diet, movement, and relaxation can help you feel better so that you can live more. Carrying any disability of the body or mind is really tough, but it's also an opportunity to face up to how hard you're prepared to fight for your precious life. And it therefore makes a lot of people more resilient, but also more grateful. Think about Stephen Hawking, age 20, told he had 2 months to live from motor neurone disease. But he had other ideas because he was going to solve the mystery of the universe. So sorry, hello, I don't think that's going to happen. And it didn't happen. and he had the most exceptional life. So miracles do happen, and people do go against the prognoses, the long-term diagnostic outcomes that they're given for their condition. People do kick against that, and there has to be something behind that. And you might be one of those people who's going to prove everybody wrong. So I'm now going to go on and tell you a bit more about what happened to me, and hopefully this will give you an indication of just how you can do little things in your own life, which is something we'll go into more in the following weeks. My stroke happened in 1986. I was 20 years old and I was a second year medical student. I was a county runner. I was a good athlete and I ran everywhere. I cycled everywhere. I played lots of tennis and squash, and the life was just going so well. And I was very, very happy. And I had absolutely no risk factors for being ill. In fact, I'd never really been ill in my life. And then I had a very dense, devastating stroke. And unfortunately, back in the 1980s, it was very, very uncommon for young people to have strokes. So I don't remember any of this because I was unconscious the whole time. I vaguely remember the whole of my right side going dead and feeling like a brick and slumping. And then after that, I vaguely recall some ambulance trips, sirens, reassuring words. And then the next thing, I'd woken up in the University Hospital, Cardiff, having apparently been originally sent to a different hospital that didn't know what was wrong with me. So I was then sent to the top university hospital. And I think it was probably the next day that I really came round. And at that point, I slowly realised that, this was not good. I was in hospital for 4 months. It took 2 months just to get a flicker of movement in my right thumb. My stroke had affected the whole of my right arm, the whole of my right leg, the whole of my face, and right side of my face, and also my speech had completely gone. And I had no sensation as well as no movement. I had what you would call a dense completed stroke, the most dense type of stroke, really, but also the most common form of stroke. And back then, they didn't have the knowledge and facilities to admit you rapidly the way you do with chest pain, and therefore to potentially reverse any long-term damage. So as a result and a consequence of the lack of knowledge back then, and you could argue even now, I did not receive the treatment that I might receive now, and I therefore have lost over 2/3 of function in my left side of my brain. So I have a significant reduction in brain capacity if you look at my brain scan. I had to learn to write with my left hand because I was dominantly right-handed, so that was very tricky. I had to obviously learn to speak again. I had to learn how to walk again. And I remember when I was in hospital all those months, being quite sort of feeling very at odds with everything and everyone, because all the other people on the stroke doing stroke physio were elderly, and I didn't feel there was anybody I could relate to. And I really missed that, actually, I'll be honest. But I also remember that the consultants, when they came round, that they always said the same thing. This is a very devastating stroke. Your recovery is very slow. Hopefully we will get you out of the wheelchair and you will have a walking aid. But obviously, 100% you won't be able to return to medicine. And we're very sorry. And I remember I was really cross because I thought, excuse me, you don't know me from Adam. How are you in a position to tell me what is going to pan out for my life? Because I think I will decide, I will be the master of my destiny, not you. because you don't know what I'm capable of. Only I know what I'm capable of. So I basically disregarded all the medical advice and all the advice that the physios gave me. And I kind of was a little bit naughty in that respect. I would escape from the ward at night. In the early days, I was literally crawling out the ward under cover of darkness when there's less staff. And then I would do my own physio in the park behind the hospital. And I did it because I felt that the physio I received was really pathetic. It wasn't enough for me. But I was told you mustn't do too much, you'll make your spasticity worse. But I did it, and I carried on until I would collapse in the park, and then some medical student would wander past and piggyback me back into the ward. And I got into a lot of trouble. The physios and the consultants would say, you shouldn't do that, you're going to make yourself worse. And I thought, well, actually, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me, because maybe it is making my tone worse and my spasticity worse, but all I know is up here, it's making me feel so much better about myself. And surely everything comes from here. Everything comes from your attitude of mind. So I thought, no, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. I'm going to carry on anyway. From there, I carried on asking my occupational therapist if I could do crazy things like, I'd like to travel to see a specialist stroke rehab person in London. So she helped me negotiate stairs and escalators whilst I was still an inpatient in hospital, took me to the local shopping centre. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying learning how to negotiate stairs. And I still find it difficult. I still spend most of my life looking down at the floor. And I'm still permanently terrified I'm going to fall over, because I often do. But it doesn't stop me trying. And I did those things. I did the stairs, I did the escalators, I tried public transport. I had an attempt at getting back on the bicycle. And I fell off a number of times before I realised and had the sense to understand that I can't return to getting back on the bicycle. And I tried running again, but again, I noticed that I wasn't going to ever be able to run again. And but I had to go through the process of trying it in order to come out the other side and accept it. And then a friend who'd had polio suggested that I try swimming. Now, swimming is something I could do, but I found it really boring. But I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. And I'll explain why I persevered with it in a bit. So when I left hospital after 4 months, I went home for a period of time to stay with my parents via the YMCA, which I lived in for a time in Cardiff. And then at home, I started to walk to the local swimming pool. And at the local swimming pool, there I was in my swimming costume. You can see everything, really, can't you, when you're in a swimming cosy? You can't hide your disability. You can't stick your hand in your pocket out the way or anything like that. So I was very naked to the world. And back in the 1980s, it wasn't as politically correct as it is now. So I experienced a lot of really ugly comments when I went swimming. And the more repeatable ones include things like spastic packy. But I had everything thrown at me. And it would increase my tone, and then I would be stuck to the side of the pool. I wouldn't move. But I carried on. And I carried on because one person at university gave me hope. And that made me determined to kick all the racist comments and the ableism comments, prejudice against disability one side, and just focus on what I know I needed to do. So I carried on learning to write with my left hand, which is still a bit of a scrawl. Learning to speak again, all the A, E, I, O, U's that you do, and walking, and swimming, and starting to do a little bit of gym work as well. And the reason why I think I pulled myself forward despite all the issues that I faced was one, my family. My parents were incredibly supportive, and they didn't cotton wool me. I know that I really worried them a lot. I know that I terrified them with the things I did, and I still do, because I'm just don't seem to think about danger. And Quietly, they struggled with it, but they never told me that I shouldn't do things. Even when I was falling off my bike, they didn't say, really, should you be doing that? They thought, this girl needs to figure it out on her own. And I respect them so much for that. I really respect the fact that they didn't cottonwool me. I mean, for example, when I first went home, I had my stroke down my right side. The toilet roll holder was still on the right-hand side when I was sat on the bog. And I can't tell you how hard it is to try and twist yourself round when you're balanced, truncal balance down your right side is forward to reach that toilet paper. But they didn't think, oh, we better make things easy for Satinder. And in a way, I'm really proud that they looked at me as just Satinder. They didn't look at me as somebody who's their daughter who's now had a stroke and needs to be treated differently. And I guess they probably thought, well, if she can't do it, she'll ask. But I didn't, because I'm stubborn like that. And I thought, I'm going to get to that toilet paper. And the other thing was, as I mentioned earlier, I've had Mike in my life, who's, along with colleagues at work as well over the years, and more recently, the clients who attend my gardening therapy, have started to make me look at myself in a more positive light. But most key, particularly in the very early stages when I was still an inpatient in hospital, I received hope from one consultant who noticed that we've got a very bloody minded woman here who really is not listening and doing as she's told. Maybe she might prove everybody wrong. And his name was Professor Alistair Compston, and I still keep in touch with him to this day. And he went on to be a very renowned neurologist doing famous work on multiple sclerosis research. And I have so much respect for this man, because without me realizing until years later, actually, he somehow managed to convince the medical board that if I passed a series of tests, that I should be allowed to return to medicine. And the whole of the medical board was dead against it. Understandably, it's a very, very demanding course, and I wouldn't be given any special dispensation. I would have to do everything that all the other medical students were going to do. I'd have to jump through the very same hoops as everybody else. But he convinced them that, look, you've nothing to lose just by letting me see how she is with a series of tests after so many months. And to put it in perspective, I had my stroke in the March of 1986. I travelled by train to see Professor Compston in Cardiff, because I was staying at home by that time, in the November of the same year. So barely more than half a year after the stroke, I was going to see if I would be allowed to be back on the course. And would you believe it? I passed all the tests. Some of them were to do with my cognitive function, ability to think, remember, concentrate. And there were others that involved me being able to do basic things like gripping with my right hand and my walking, obviously. So Professor Compston gave me hope. And that was the hope that made me push myself when everything was hurting, everything was painful, when I was going through my 21st birthday, staying at my parents' house, sort of on my own, having only, a few months after having had a stroke, literally, and alienated from all my peers. It just got me through all of that. So hope is really important, because with hope, then you can start to believe that there is options in your life and that the doors aren't all closed. And I can't overemphasize how important that is. Now, I'll go on to talk a little about the struggle, but I'll try not to dwell on that too much because it's a bit boring. So medical training, returning to medicine as a young girl, was really hard because, frankly, everybody compared me to how I'd been before, which was very, very active, very much part of the team. I was year rep and everything, and I was in a number of university sports teams. So students didn't really know how to take me. And to be honest, they kind of just didn't. They kind of ignored me, really. So that was a bit difficult. And also I had some not very tactful comments from some of the guys, which reminded me how much I'd changed and, oh, you can't dance like you used to, and it made me feel very unattractive and felt like I was no longer like one of the group. And so that was hard, but I had to bear it all, because in those days at med school, you couldn't show any emotion. You couldn't show that you were struggling in any way, because you had to be tough at med school. And anything like that, any kind of weakness, you'd be out. So I had to bury all my emotional feelings, and I did, somehow. So, and I experienced some very unpleasant, unhelpful comments from lecturers, from consultants, who basically were telling me I'm a token gesture, that I shouldn't be there. I remember in one Viva, I struggled to answer a question, and the professor turned to a colleague and said, "You know, this girl had expressive dysphasia. As you can see, she hasn't recovered." So I used to get a lot of unpleasant taunts and teasing. But what it actually did is it made me realize that I just had to be better than the average person if I was going to be treated the same. And in a way, that was okay, because my dad had already told me growing up as an immigrant, daughter of an immigrant, that I needed to work hard and harder in order to, be accepted the same, and that was okay. That's just part and parcel of moving into a new country. So I'd already prepared myself for a life where I had to really work hard. And I realized that, okay, I'm now a minority ethnic female who also has disability. So bring it on. I'll just have to work even harder and prove even more that I'm up there with my peers. So it was difficult. Training with disability was very hard, because I had so much negative comments. I decided that I would pick the hardest jobs when I qualified. So I picked the jobs that had the 1 in 2 rotations, that involved 100-hour weeks, pounding the wards, that involved a lot of manual dexterity. So I worked in acute medicine a lot, in accident emergency. I worked in obs and gynae, so I was doing all the suturing, all the injections, all the lumbar punctures and things. So it was very demanding, and I had to think how I was going to adapt my body, because while everybody else was going on the job, I was thinking, how do I do the job? But I have to really think about all the little things, the little breakdown of all the different components in doing that job. I can't just pick my arm up and do it like the rest of them are. So there was a lot of brain work involved, and there was a lot of struggle involved, but I kept up with it. And to be honest, there were some jobs that I did where the other medics, newly qualified junior doctors, were falling like flies, struggling, but I kept going, because I thought, no, I can't, because if I give in, if I break down, then they're going to say, well, of course, she's disabled. What did we tell you? Of course she's not going to cope. So I coped. And not only that, but I also decided that I could see they thought, how can she be able to work properly with half a brain? So I thought, okay, I shall enter competitions. And I did. I entered one on a research project against other medical students, and I won. And I was absolutely gobsmacked, because I'm not very academic, would you believe? But I actually won, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then I entered another competition when I was in general practice against other GP trainees. And again, I won that as well. So, and actually, it was only recently when I was looking at my CV for an application that I thought, actually, that was quite an achievement if you think about it. So that was another thing I had to deal with, was everything is a lot harder to compute. You learn having to write exams very quickly. But I got through. The only downside, of course, was that because I was working with disability, I was more prone to needle stick injuries. And we all got needle stick injuries back in the 80s, but the culture was not to complain, because if you complained, you were seen as being weak. And that wasn't how you were expected to be. And unfortunately, my needle stick injuries resulted in me getting hepatitis C, but I didn't know that until a few months after I'd married Mike. And then, unfortunately, because it was so advanced, I had to go on to 18 months of chemotherapy, which failed. But then later on, a few years later, I received new novel treatment, and that actually worked. So I'm thankfully now cured. But it was a very difficult process to go through, and it was one of the kind of the victims of all the hard work was that I developed a different sickness as a result. And unfortunately, the sequelae of that was that it gave me other health problems as well. Because when I had my hepatitis C and I was on my treatment, I carried on working. I wasn't allowed to see patients because I was too immunocompromised, but I did a lot of work in other areas of the NHS, and I did a little bit of family planning work still. So I really pushed myself too hard, and that then drove me to develop other health conditions. And that's one personal reason why I really want to talk to you about how important it is to listen to your body and understand how to serve your body with respect. Because I have had a great life, but I've also not respected my body all the time, and I've paid the price for it, and I don't want that to happen to you. So that's the struggle. And obviously my first marriage was a lot of struggle, and I have a lot of pain. I had recent shoulder surgery, which has failed, and that gives me a lot of pain. And I have ongoing arthritis because I've been overdoing physical work in all my life, and I tend to obviously do it more lopsided, and that does cause skeletal problems. But I wouldn't take any of it away. It's been 1,000% worth it, because I feel like I've lived a life, and I would do it all again. So now I'm going to go on to last bit of this, the achievements. And the first was being a doctor, qualifying, and entering general practice. The other is the things I did both earlier and later on following stroke. So the first thing I did, less than 2 years after stroke, was I mentioned to you swimming. Well, swimming kind of became my substitute for not being able to run and cycle. And so I was a bit like the Forrest Gump of swimmers. Once I got in that pool, I just didn't want to stop. And I did a 100 length swim of a 30-meter pool, non-stop, front crawl. And I did that in aid of charity less than 2 years after my. So also traveled while I was a medical student. I did my sorry, there's just something popped up on the screen which I'm going to just close off. When I was a medical student, I also decided to travel solo to Malawi, and out I lived in a tent, and I traveled to a very remote hospital where I worked with very poor and poorly people with very advanced pathology, and that was a fascinating experience. And the other thing that was good about that, and the reason I bring it up, is that when I was abroad in Malawi, people didn't know my history. They didn't compare me to the old Satinder. They just looked at me as somebody with a bit of a gammy arm and a strange limp, but they allowed me to be myself. They weren't sort of like talking to me with preconceptions. And that was wonderful for me. And I'd really recommend it, going somewhere where nobody knows you, because it's difficult sometimes after you've had a stroke not to be compared to the old you. And that can be hard when you're on the receiving end of that. So I had a fantastic time in Malawi. It was very challenging. I climbed a mountain, Zomba Plateau. Again, I didn't realize it was a big deal until somebody said, "Oh, that's a big deal." And that was a few years ago. I also did some whitewater rafting out there. And that's when I started to learn that, I might be disabled, but I can still haul my body around, just chuck it about and enjoy yourself, and I have. And since then, I've carried on doing solo treks. I spent 2 years when I was a G working and living in New Zealand. Fantastic experience. I maxed out on all the extreme sports they do out there, like the jumping out of aeroplanes on my own, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting over the highest raftable waterfall in the world, doing 3-day solo treks up mountains, did 2 of those, kayaking in the sea. really amazing experiences. And okay, I did them badly, but I completed them and in my own style. And I felt exhilarated at the end of it. And, I've had many scars all over my body from exploits, but they're beautiful scars because they come with really fantastic memories. I've mentioned I've done some flying and the sailing, and we sail in some very challenging conditions and some scary conditions, but it's been very much worth it and very enjoyable. We try and go off grid. We have a small holding, and in fact, my husband's just helped deliver a lamb this morning, and we also have pigs, hens, and a dog. And I've set up a charity, which is usually runs in the summer, but unfortunately at the moment, because of COVID-19, we can't run it. And I'm hoping to return to work after a period of 5 years off with ill health. And I'm also helping out during the COVID emergency. And there's lots of other things that I've done, but I'm conscious of time. So I thought I'd wrap it up now. And I'm just going to see if Greg has any messages for me that I might be able to answer questions on. So if you can bear with me for a second. Okay, so there's one question which has come in, which is, where was I in hospital and rehab, and for how long? So I was in hospital in Cardiff, University Hospital, Cardiff, and because that's where I was a medical student. And I was in hospital for 4 months. The rehab I had was just when I was in hospital, the time I was in hospital. And that was probably for the first couple of months. And then after that, to be honest, I didn't find that it was helpful for me. If anything, I found the occupational therapy was more useful. I mean, actually, they're great, the occupational therapists. Just things like learning how to do your shoelaces up in one hand and dress yourself. And I'm lucky in that my occupational therapist was young and very forward thinking. And so she didn't tell me what I needed to learn. She said, what do you want to be able to do? And that really is important. And I'd say, well, I want, but the problem is I always pick stupid things like, oh, I want to ride a bike, or I want to be able to run again. Or she even took me to a squash court to have a go at that. So I was lucky in that I had a great occupational therapist who encouraged me. And then I also, off my own back, went to see a physiotherapist called Mary Lynch. Now, this is obviously now back in the 1980s. I don't even know if she's alive now, but she was practicing something called the bow bath technique. And what I liked about Mary, apart from the fact that she would play with my limbs like putty and make me feel like I could do anything afterwards, like cartwheels, although of course it inevitably the tone would increase immediately afterwards. What I liked about her was that she always had a can-do attitude. So when I would say to her, I'd really like to get back on my bike, she was the only health professional who said, give it a go, try. And I like that. I like that about her. So all I would say is, if there's something that really matters to you that you think would make you feel happier. I mean, if you're struggling to think about the things that you enjoyed when you were a kid, because often that's when we're most like our real self, because it's before all those layers are built up from life experiences. Think about what you genuinely enjoy. Think about your childhood and what game made you smile, made you laugh. And try and revisit that. And just remember that you can do more than you think you can do. I had a very devastating stroke, and I'm still pretty disabled from it, but it hasn't stopped me from having a very full life. You just have to be prepared that you have to adapt and that you have to accept that there's going to be knockbacks, but you just have to keep picking yourself up. Those of you remember Weebles, it's a bit like Weebles that wobble but don't fall down. You just have to keep getting back up and try and be grateful. Think about not just about all the bad things that happen in your day, but think about, what's gone well today. Think about somebody who's been nice to you, and think about something nice you've done for somebody else. because those things will help to put everything in perspective. And go outside and look at nature. Nature is a fantastic way of grounding all of us, especially during this really difficult time. And with that, I'll just check if there's any more questions from Greg. I don't think so. So I'll just check though in case I've missed anything. So that's it. I'll say bye. Have a lovely rest of the day. Hope there's some sunshine where you are. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week where we'll be talking about sleep. Bye, everybody. Look after yourselves and look after each other. Bye-bye.